The metal stretcher felt colder than it should have, even through the thin hospital gown they draped over me after the fall. I sat propped against the railing outside the ER doors, listening to the steady hum of ambulance engines and trying to ignore the throb in my hip. A medic walked past, wheeling equipment, and the night air pressed against my skin with a weight that made everything feel slower. I kept my eyes on the ground, steadying my breath, when the EMT who'd brought me in stepped to my side with a look that didn't match the calm tone he'd used earlier. Something in his expression tightened the space around us. He leaned closer than people normally do, close enough that I could smell the latex from his gloves. His voice dropped to a whisper, sharp and plain. "Sir, don't go home tonight." The words didn't have warning in them. They had fear, real fear. It landed in my chest before I had time to react, and for a second my hands went still against the blanket. I looked at him fully then, seeing the tension around his eyes, the way he kept glancing toward the automatic doors as if someone might walk out behind him. I asked him why, and he shifted his weight, as though answering could pull him into something he wasn't supposed to be part of. He said he'd overheard something in the hallway, while my son and daughter-in-law thought no one was listening. He didn't repeat the full sentence, but he said the tone wasn't right, and that it didn't sound like family concern. He struggled for the next words, his jaw tightening as if debating whether to say more. The parking lot lights cast shadows across the ambulance bay, and in that dim light, his face looked younger and more anxious than when he'd wheeled me in. I waited, trying to keep my voice steady despite the dull ache in my leg and the sudden heat in my chest. The EMT finally said, "My son mentioned tonight, and something that needed to be handled before morning." He didn't dress it up. He didn't soften it. He just said it straight, like someone delivering a fact they wish they hadn't learned. The way he spoke made it clear he wasn't misreading the moment. He believed I was in real danger. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of exhaust and disinfectant from the loading zone. I felt a slow wave of disorientation, not from the fall, but from the realization that the warning wasn't vague. It was pointed. My home had always been a place I walked into without thinking. Hearing someone tell me not to return to it pressed something cold against the back of my mind. I tried to replay the last few days with my son, the quick conversations, the strange tension, but everything blurred together under the weight of those 6 words. I asked the EMT what exactly my son had said. A simple question, one any man would ask. But he lifted his head and scanned the bay again, as if someone was watching. Then he shook his head slightly, not in refusal, but in reluctance. The kind that comes when someone knows more than they should. His mouth opened like he was about to answer, but the ER doors slid open, and another medic called his name. He stepped back before finishing, leaving the rest hanging between us. He only said, "Please, just don't go there tonight." Then he moved toward the doors, his pace quick, his shoulders tight, like speaking more could cost him something he wasn't ready to lose. I watched him disappear inside, the stretcher cooling beneath me as the night pressed close. For the first time in my life, I wasn't sure if returning to my own house was safe. When my wife passed, the house didn't change all at once. It changed in quiet ways, long pauses in the hallway, a chair left untouched, evenings that felt too big for one person. I spent months learning the new routines of a life, without her voice drifting through the rooms. Some nights were harder than others, and I moved through them with the slow steadiness of a man trying not to fall apart. When my son suggested he and his wife move in to help, I accepted without thinking much about it. At the time, it felt like support. It felt like family stepping in when life had taken something important away. Their first weeks in the house were easy enough. My son carried boxes upstairs, and my daughter-in-law filled the kitchen with the quiet sounds of someone cooking for more than one person again. I told myself this was what families were supposed to do: come together after a loss, fill the empty spaces, share the weight. But as the house adjusted to their presence, I noticed the atmosphere shifting in ways I couldn't quite name. The air didn't feel heavier, it felt observed. It began with small habits. Doors that were always open started staying shut. Conversations in the hallway went quiet the moment I stepped near them. My son started locking the garage door from the inside, even though we'd never done that before. I caught them whispering more often, their voices dropping faster than their sentences. When I asked what they were discussing, they smiled a little too slowly and said it was nothing important. Those words never matched the expressions they tried to hide. One afternoon, My son said we should update the financial arrangements now that the household had changed. He said it casually, as if it were routine, but it didn't feel casual. He talked about consolidating accounts, automating payments, simplifying things for the long run. I listened carefully, sensing a push beneath the surface of his suggestions. He was younger, more confident with technology, and he spoke as though I'd already agreed. When I paused to think, he called it overthinking. The comment landed quietly, but stayed in my mind longer than it should have. My daughter-in-law started paying close attention to my medications, more than I asked her to. At first, she offered reminders in a polite, steady tone. Then she began counting the pills, asking about dosages I'd taken for years, and moving the bottles into places she preferred. She said she didn't want me forgetting anything. I hadn't forgotten anything. Still, she watched me take each dose, with a soft insistence that didn't match the concern she claimed to have. The unease grew slowly, like something drifting closer across a quiet lake. Nothing drastic happened, nothing loud, but the pattern of small changes formed a shape I couldn't ignore. Their help felt less like support and more like supervision. They spoke to each other in the kind of tone people use when they're planning something, not when they're caring for someone. I tried to give them the benefit of the doubt, but doubt only grows when the pieces don't fit anymore. There was one moment that marked the shift clearly. Late one evening, I walked into the living room and found them sitting on the couch with the TV off, talking in low voices. They stopped instantly when they saw me. My son reached for the remote as if they'd been watching something, but the screen was still dark. My daughter-in-law gave me a tight smile and said they were just sorting future plans. She emphasized the word future in a way that didn't match the smile. I stood there long enough to feel the tension settle into the room. It was the first time I wondered if they were here to help me or manage me. The question stayed with me, quiet and uncomfortable, long before anyone whispered a warning in an ambulance bay. When I got home from the hospital, I wasn't sure if the EMT's warning had been shaped by something he misheard or if I had let the pain medication color the moment. The house looked the same from the outside, porch light on, curtains drawn, everything still. But stepping inside felt different. The air carried a quiet stiffness, as though something had been adjusted while I was away. I set my hospital papers on the table and reached for my phone, only to find it placed on the opposite end, from where I always left it. Small detail, but wrong. In the kitchen, the pill organizer sat open. Days shifted around. I hadn't touched it since before the fall. Some doses were moved, some missing, others placed under the wrong day. The pattern didn't look like a mistake. It looked like someone trying to reorganize something they didn't understand. I checked the mail next. Someone had sorted it into two neat stacks, junk and important. But important included bills I always opened myself, and junk included letters I needed. It wasn't sorting, it was filtering. I stood there a moment, letting each misplaced piece settle into place in my mind. My son walked in just as I was flipping through the envelopes. He spoke too quickly, as if he had practiced an explanation before entering the room. He said he'd only been helping. He said he'd moved the phone because the table was dusty. He said the pills were off because maybe the hospital messed with them. His words came out clean and smooth, but they didn't match his eyes. They were moving too much, checking my reactions like he was watching for signs of doubt. I asked why the mail was sorted the way it was. He said he just wanted to make things easier. But when I pointed to a letter that shouldn't have been opened, he said he thought it was junk. 5 minutes earlier, he'd said he separated junk from important. The contradiction wasn't loud, but it was there. He corrected himself quickly, giving another explanation that didn't fix the first one. Each answer created more space for suspicion. While he talked, I stepped into my study and opened the drawer with my financial papers. A statement lay slightly out of alignment, as if someone had pulled it out and slid it back too fast. I opened it. A withdrawal had been made from the joint savings account, an account we rarely touched. The number wasn't small enough to ignore or large enough to scream theft. It sat in the middle, the kind of amount someone might take if they didn't want to be noticed. I walked back into the living room and asked him about it. I kept my tone steady. No accusation. His reaction didn't match the size of the question. He snapped that I must have forgotten authorizing it. The defensiveness hit too fast, too sharp. He didn't ask what withdrawal I meant. He didn't even look surprised. He just went straight to blame. I held the statement in my hand, watching the way his jaw tightened as I read the number aloud. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a shadow near the hallway. My daughter-in-law stood at the bedroom door, not stepping in, not stepping away, just listening. Her posture was still, her expression blank, and she didn't try to hide that she was there. When she realized I'd seen her, she offered a thin smile that carried no warmth. Then she closed the door softly, as if she were sealing the sound inside. The house grew quiet again, but it wasn't peaceful. It was the kind of calm that feels arranged, the kind built on rehearsed behavior and tight control. I sat down slowly, the paper still in my hand, the silence settling like a weight across the room. Nothing about their explanations made sense anymore, and nothing inside my home felt like it belonged to me alone. I waited until the hallway was quiet before walking into my home office. The door creaked slightly as I pushed it open, a small sound that felt louder than it should have. The room smelled faintly of dust and printer ink, the way it always did, but the air felt unsettled, as if someone had moved through it recently. I turned on the desk lamp and saw the first sign that something had been disturbed. Papers that were normally stacked in careful rows sat uneven, edges bent in ways I would never leave them. I opened the top drawer and found folders pushed toward the back, not aligned the way I keep them. Someone had been searching. I pulled the insurance folder from the drawer and laid it on the desk. The tab was bent, and several pages were out of order, the dates shuffled. I flipped through them slowly, trying not to let my breathing change. My system has never been complicated. Oldest papers in the back, newest up front. What I saw didn't follow that pattern. It followed someone else's hands. Someone had been looking for something. Someone who didn't know how I organized my life. The disorder felt intentional, but not skillful. Beside the folder was a small yellow sticky note I didn't recognize. The handwriting was thin, rounded, not mine. It listed medication dosages, but the numbers were wrong. Some doubled, some crossed out, others rewritten. At the bottom, a question mark sat beside the word increase, written in my daughter-in-law's handwriting. I stared at it for a moment, feeling a cold quiet settle across my shoulders. I had never asked anyone to adjust my medications. I hadn't mentioned confusion. I hadn't shown any sign of forgetting. Yet someone was planning changes that had nothing to do with what I needed. I placed the note aside and opened the next folder. Inside was something that didn't belong there at all. A printed email draft. The tone hit me before the words did. It wasn't written by me, and it wasn't written for me. It described my declining coordination and my increasing difficulty managing daily responsibilities. It mentioned future decisions that may need to be made for his safety. Each line read like a script built to convince someone that I was slipping. It was too polished to be casual. It was too specific to be concern. My eyes moved down the page slowly, absorbing each sentence as the tension in my chest tightened. Whoever wrote this wasn't preparing to help me. They were preparing to explain me, explain what I supposedly couldn't do anymore, explain why someone else needed to take control. This wasn't a conversation I'd been part of. It was a narrative being shaped without my knowledge, one that painted a version of me that didn't exist, a version they needed me to become. As I placed the draft back on the desk, my phone buzzed. The vibration echoed off the wooden surface, breaking the stillness of the room. I answered, expecting a routine follow-up from the hospital. Instead, a nurse asked if I wanted to confirm the rescheduled appointment for next week. My grip tightened slightly on the phone. I told her I hadn't rescheduled anything. There was a brief pause on her end before she said someone had called on my behalf. She didn't say who. She didn't need to. When the call ended, I sat in the chair without moving. The desk lamp threw a narrow circle of light across the papers, highlighting the disordered folders, the altered note, the crafted narrative. It wasn't random. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was careful. It was planned. Every change, every adjustment, every misplaced item pointed to one conclusion. Someone was laying the groundwork to prove I couldn't take care of myself. The fear that followed wasn't loud. It was steady, deliberate, and cold. And it told me the warning in the ambulance bay hadn't been an exaggeration at all. They were building a case, piece by piece. I walked across the yard to my neighbor's house late in the afternoon, hoping fresh air would clear the tightness in my chest. The sun hung low, casting long shadows across the driveway, and each step felt heavier than the last. She answered the door with a cautious smile, the kind people wear when they sense something is wrong, but don't know how to ask. I told her I needed a moment of her time. She hesitated, glanced inside her house, then stepped out onto the porch with me. The silence between us felt thick, waiting for the right words to cut it open. I asked if she had heard anything unusual a few days earlier, anything involving my son. Her eyes shifted, not out of guilt, but out of worry. She said she hadn't wanted to get involved, but since I was asking directly, she would tell me the truth. She lowered her voice and repeated a sentence she wished she hadn't overheard. "He won't be our problem much longer." The way she said it sounded like she'd been replaying it in her head, trying to decide if she misunderstood. But she hadn't. She said my son's tone wasn't frustrated or tired. It was final. The words hit me in a way nothing else had. A simple sentence, but the kind only spoken by someone who had already made up his mind about something he shouldn't. Before I could respond, she added another detail. She said that during a neighborhood barbecue the week before, he'd asked people what they thought my house might sell for in today's market. He said it casually, as though he owned the place. She'd thought it was strange, but assumed he was joking. When she saw the look on my face now, she realized it wasn't a joke. I thanked her quietly and walked home with the kind of clarity that doesn't comfort, it tightens. Inside, the house felt colder. I went straight to my desk and opened my laptop. I searched through folders I hadn't checked in weeks, and it didn't take long to find messages my daughter-in-law hadn't deleted carefully enough. They were drafts again, emails saved, but unsent. The language was almost clinical. She wrote about a transition timeline and the need to finalize responsibilities before emotional complications arise. Every line assumed a future where I wasn't part of my own home. My phone buzzed on the desk, and for a moment I considered ignoring it. The voicemail icon blinked. When I played it, the voice of my insurance agent filled the room. He said he received a request from my son to update primary beneficiaries and streamline account access. He wanted confirmation before moving forward. My name wasn't the one listed on the callback request. The agent sounded polite, but underneath that politeness was confusion, maybe suspicion. I set the phone down, feeling the air grow heavier. I went to the kitchen for a glass of water, trying to calm the rising heat in my chest. When I turned the corner, I smelled something faint and metallic. I stepped closer and saw the stove burner glowing under a metal pot. No flame, just the red coil, humming quietly. The pot was bone dry, the metal hot enough to warp if left longer. No one claimed to have used it. No one came forward to explain. It wasn't an accident. Not tonight. Not after everything else. I stood there staring at that burner, the glow reflecting off the stainless steel, and the truth settled in, clean and sharp. The emails, the appointment changes, the altered documents, none of it was random. None of it was confusion. They weren't just planning to take control of my decisions. They were setting the stage for a version of me that couldn't defend himself. Whether their plan ended with me being declared unfit or ended somewhere darker, I finally understood one thing with absolute certainty. I wasn't safe in my own home. I called my doctor early the next morning and asked if he had a few minutes to speak privately. He'd known me for over 20 years, long enough to hear the tone in my voice and understand it wasn't a social visit. He told me to come in through the side entrance, the one usually used for staff. When I arrived, he didn't greet me with small talk or jokes the way he once did. He just put a hand on my shoulder and led me straight to his office, closing the door behind us with a quiet click that felt heavier than it should have. He asked how I'd been feeling since the fall, but I told him that wasn't why I was there. I explained the rescheduled appointment, the strange behavior at home, the comments I'd been hearing. His expression shifted slowly as he listened, the lines around his eyes tightening. When I finished, he pulled my file from the drawer and laid it on the desk between us. He flipped through the pages carefully, his thumb stopping on one of the recent entries. There was a note I didn't recognize, something about memory concerns expressed by family. He tapped the page with the end of his pen. "I didn't write this," he said quietly. He turned another page, then another, finding more adjustments, subtle, but not subtle enough. Some described coordination issues. Others hinted at executive function decline. None of them were true. None of them reflected the appointments we'd actually had. He sat back in his chair and folded his hands, the pen resting between his fingers. "These changes weren't made by accident," he said. "Someone asked for them." The room felt smaller when he said it. The air felt still, as if even the vents were listening. I asked him who would have the authority to request notes like that. He shook his head slowly. Only immediate family is taken seriously when they claim a patient is showing signs of decline. He didn't need to say my son's name. We both knew the answer. He leaned forward, lowering his voice without making it dramatic, just factual. He spelled out the pattern of elder exploitation the way someone might explain a medical diagnosis. Calm, direct, without emotion clouding the facts. He said it starts with changing small things in the record. A missed appointment, a note about confusion, a comment about decision-making. Each piece, on its own, looks harmless. Put together, it forms the beginning of a case for incompetence. If someone tries to petition for control over your decisions, he said, the medical file becomes the foundation, and yours is being shaped without your knowledge. I asked him if he believed there was any doubt left about what was happening. He looked at me with the steady certainty of someone who has seen similar cases too many times. Your son has already attempted to influence your record, he said. He's preparing something formal, and once that starts, it moves faster than most people realize. There was no anger in his tone, no judgment, just the weight of truth delivered plainly. He told me to protect every document I had, financial, medical, legal. He said to make copies of everything and store them somewhere secure, somewhere outside the house, if possible. He also told me not to mention this appointment to anyone at home. You need time, he said. Time to get ahead of this, before they push it further. When I stood to leave, he didn't offer comforting words. He simply nodded. The kind of nod that carries the understanding that something irreversible has begun. I walked out of the office feeling the shift inside me. There was no doubt left. No room for excuses. This was the point of no return, and whatever came next would require me to be sharper than I'd been in years. I waited until the house settled into its usual nighttime routine before moving through the hallway. The floor creaked in the same places it always had, but tonight every sound felt like a reminder to stay deliberate. I entered my study, closed the door slowly, and turned on the desk lamp. Its narrow light created just enough visibility to work without drawing attention. I pulled the box of important papers from the bottom drawer, the one they never seemed interested in, and spread everything across the desk. Birth certificate, property deed, insurance statements, old partnership files. I gathered each document with steady hands, sorting them into a folder I intended to hide somewhere neither of them would think to look. I chose a place in the garage, behind an old toolbox filled with loose screws and rusted nails. No one touched that toolbox except me. I slid the folder into a plastic bag, sealed it, and tucked it deep behind the metal case. The moment I set it down, a strange calm came over me. Not relief, just certainty. They wouldn't find these papers, even if they searched every inch of the house. Back inside, I took out my phone and called the attorney my doctor had recommended. I kept my voice low as I explained everything, every misplaced paper, every altered appointment, every attempt to control my routines. He didn't interrupt. When I finished, he said the timeline matched a classic takeover pattern. He had seen it before. Small shifts designed to create a narrative of incompetence, followed by legal moves made faster than the victim could react. He told me he would help, but warned that I needed to be careful. Trust no explanations from them, he said. Watch what they do, not what they say. His certainty anchored something inside me. When I stepped back into the hallway, the house felt different, like the walls were listening. My son appeared out of the living room almost immediately, his face tight, pretending to be casual. He asked where I'd been, even though I had only walked to the garage. His questions weren't normal check-ins anymore. They had rhythm, aggressive rhythm. He hovered close, eyes tracking my movements as if expecting me to slip. His concern had turned watchful, and the watchfulness had turned into something sharper. Later, while I sat at the kitchen table pretending to review junk mail, my daughter-in-law joined me. She sat down without invitation, placing herself directly across from me. She smiled, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. She asked if I had given any thought to long-term plans. The way she said long-term didn't sound hopeful. It sounded expectant. She asked if I'd considered lightening the burden of managing things on my own. Each question pushed toward the same point. When I planned to hand over control, I kept my voice soft, letting myself sound slightly uncertain. I paused longer than necessary, let my eyes drift. let my hands sit still on the table. Her gaze sharpened, watching every hesitation. She thought she was seeing weakness. She thought I was unraveling. The truth was simpler. I needed to see her reaction. And I saw enough. She leaned forward, not physically, but emotionally, ready to fill any gap she believed I left open. She wanted confirmation that the path they had built was working. I stood quietly and thanked her for checking on me, giving nothing else away. Her expression told me she believed I was slipping into exactly the role they needed me to play. That belief was useful. It bought me time. When I returned to my room, I closed the door and sat on the edge of the bed. The decision had already formed, clear and steady. The confrontation couldn't be rushed, and it couldn't be accidental. It had to happen on my terms, with every piece in place, with no room for them to twist the truth. I wasn't preparing for an argument. I was preparing for proof. I was sitting in the living room when my son walked in, carrying a thick folder, the same one he'd been circling around for weeks. He didn't sit. He planted himself in front of me with the confidence of someone who thought the finish line was already behind him. He placed the folder on the coffee table and said, "We needed to sign the new papers tonight." His voice carried no softness, only the kind of firmness people use when they think they're protecting their own interests. He added that it was all for safety, though he never clarified whose safety he meant. My daughter-in-law slipped in behind him and sat on the couch smoothly, folding her hands in her lap. She looked composed, calm in a rehearsed way, as if she had practiced this moment in front of a mirror. Her gaze stayed fixed on me, steady and expectant. The folder remained between us, untouched, as though the paper inside could change my life simply by existing. They both watched me, waiting for weakness, waiting for compliance. I leaned back slowly, giving myself a moment to let the silence grow. Then I asked my first question, simple and precise. Why had my appointment been moved without my consent? My son blinked, caught off guard for a fraction of a second before saying it must have been an office error. I asked why the office said he'd made the request. His expression tightened, the explanation thinning under its own weight. My daughter-in-law jumped in, saying they were only trying to help. But I asked why she'd been writing new dosage notes for medications I'd taken for years without issue. Her fingers twitched, the first crack in her practiced calm. She said she was just checking, but couldn't explain the numbers she'd written. Numbers meant to create confusion, not prevent it. I shifted my gaze to my son and asked about the withdrawal from the joint account. He said he didn't remember making it. I asked how he forgot a 4-figure change to a savings account he hadn't touched in months. His jaw clenched. His eyes dropped before he forced them back up. The contradictions were building faster than he could manage them. Their silence grew sharper, stretched thin across the room. Then came the sound I'd been waiting for, the front door opening. My attorney stepped inside calmly. Carrying a briefcase he sat on the armchair without ceremony. My son spun around, startled, and demanded to know why a lawyer was in the house. The attorney didn't answer him. He simply nodded at me. I nodded back. The timing was deliberate. I opened my folder and placed the printed emails, drafts, and altered notes on the coffee table. The room changed instantly. My son's confidence faltered, replaced by the slow realization that every step he thought he had hidden was now visible in black and white. The emails describing my decline, the drafts outlining a plan to transition responsibilities, the manipulated medical information. They were all there, documented, dated, traceable. My daughter-in-law inhaled sharply, her composure cracking for the first time. My son reached for the papers, then stopped mid-motion, as if touching them would confirm the truth he was trying to outrun. His face shifted through several expressions, confusion, denial, anger, before settling into the one he couldn't escape, recognition. He saw the full extent of what he'd built, and he saw it collapsing in front of him with no way to explain it away. My attorney spoke then, calm and measured, explaining that every document had been duplicated and filed. Every inconsistency was recorded. Every attempt to rewrite my medical record was noted. There was no shouting, no threats, just a quiet, unshakable presentation of truth. My son didn't speak. Neither did his wife. Their silence was the final admission. They had built a plan, and now they were standing in the wreckage of it. The morning after the confrontation, my attorney met me at his office before sunrise. The building was nearly empty, the hallways quiet enough that every footstep echoed. He had already drafted the filings to protect my estate, each document precise and deliberate. I sat across from him while he reviewed the final details, his voice steady as he explained what the court would see and how the pattern of interference would be documented. Nothing about the process felt triumphant. It felt necessary, like sealing a crack before the whole structure collapsed. I signed where he pointed, my hand steady, not from confidence, but from clarity. By midday, the police had been notified. They didn't arrive with sirens or urgency. 2 officers came in plain clothes, speaking with the calm professionalism of people accustomed to complicated family matters. They asked me for a statement, taking notes as I described each event. The appointment changes, the financial withdrawal, the altered records, the drafts of emails I never wrote. They didn't rush me or interrupt. When they finished, one officer nodded and said the pattern aligned with attempted financial exploitation, and they would begin a formal inquiry. The words were clinical, but their weight settled heavily in the room. They spoke to my son later that afternoon. I wasn't present for it, but the attorney relayed what happened. The officers presented him with the documents, the drafts, the timeline. They asked direct questions, each one narrowing the space he had left to explain himself. He was told plainly that the changes to my medical notes and financial accounts could lead to charges if proven intentional. They questioned my daughter-in-law separately, giving her no room to rely on his answers. The silence from both of them afterward said more than any confession could. Family members began calling as word spread. Some sounded genuinely shocked, their voices tight with disbelief. Others hesitated between concern and caution, choosing their sentences carefully as they weighed which version of the story to accept. A few defended my son without asking for details, insisting he must have been trying to help in his own way. But no one could ignore the paperwork. Facts have a way of cutting through loyalty when they're written clearly enough. I offered no explanations, no anger, and no comfort. I simply told them it would all be handled properly. When I returned home that evening, the house felt unfamiliar in its quiet. I changed every lock with the help of a locksmith who worked without asking questions. I secured my accounts, updated passwords, and placed copies of every important document in a safe deposit box at the bank. The new keys felt cold in my hand, but they also felt like something I'd reclaimed, piece by piece, from the shadows that had crept too close. In the stillness of my living room, I sat down and let the events of the day settle in. There was no rage inside me, no boiling sense of victory. What I felt was heavier, an understanding of how close I had come to losing everything, without even realizing the danger. The betrayal didn't scream. It didn't break the house open. It came quietly, hiding inside gestures that once looked like help. Accepting that truth took more strength than any confrontation. The house is safer now. The doors stay locked, the documents are protected, and the decisions are mine again. But the calm that returned to the rooms carries a different tone than before. It's cleaner, quieter, but lonelier. Trust removed leaves a space nothing fills quickly. I sat there for a long time, listening to the steady hum of the refrigerator, letting the new reality settle gently around me. The danger had passed, but the shadow of it remained, a reminder of how close family can stand to your life before you notice their intentions. The house was still when I woke the next morning, quieter than it had been in years. I walked into my study and sat at the desk, where the last of the documents were stored, each one tucked neatly into the drawer I now kept locked. The room felt different now, not because anything had changed in the furniture or the air, but because I finally knew what was safe and what wasn't. The silence didn't feel hostile anymore. It felt earned. I let my hand rest on the drawer for a moment, feeling the solid weight of it under my palm, a reminder that some things in life have to be protected by the person they belong to. I leaned back in the chair and listened to the muted hum of the house. Age changes a man's body, but it changes his understanding even more. You learn how danger doesn't always knock loudly or show itself with raised voices. Sometimes it hides in familiar footsteps, walking down your hallway. Sometimes it waits behind polite smiles and soft tones. And sometimes it lives inside people you once believed would guard your life as carefully as you guarded theirs. Growing older didn't make me blind. It made me slower to assume that harm could come from inside my own home. That was the lesson I carried into the quiet morning. Looking back, the signs hadn't come as a single moment. They arrived as small liberties taken without permission. A misplaced letter, a changed appointment, a question that seemed harmless until the pattern formed. Exploitation doesn't begin with a strike. It begins with a test, a step taken to see if you will notice, and then another to see if you will question it. When you don't, the line between help and control starts to fade. I understood now how easily that line can disappear when you assume family always means safety. I opened the drawer again and took out the folder. Not to read it. I didn't need to. I simply wanted to remind myself of why I had survived this the way I did. Every page inside represented a history I had built, a life I had shaped, and a responsibility that still belonged to me. Those papers weren't just evidence. They were identity. Age may slow a man down, but it doesn't erase what he has earned. And it doesn't hand that legacy to anyone else without his consent. If someone my age asked me what I learned, I would tell them the truth, plainly. Protect your paperwork. Track every change, and no matter how small. Ask questions even when the answers feel uncomfortable. Trust does not replace vigilance. Love does not replace observation. And the people closest to you should still be held to the same standard you hold yourself to. These aren't signs of paranoia. They are signs of self-respect in a world that assumes older adults can be steered without noticing. I placed the folder back inside the drawer and locked it again, listening to the click settle into the quiet. This wasn't just about keeping a house or an account safe. It was about holding on to the parts of myself that mattered long before anyone tried to take them. I defended more than assets. I defended the right to remain myself, the right to stay standing in my own life without being pushed aside. The study filled with soft morning light, the kind that arrives without force. I breathed slowly, feeling the calm settle into my bones, a quiet warmth replacing the tension that had lived here too long. The danger had passed, but the clarity stayed with me. And the truth that settled deepest was simple enough for any man my age to understand. Growing old doesn't make you weak. Trusting the wrong person does.